for you. Did you bring the champion's belt? Good. Falcon, shall I tell you something before you die? Dark and light, the two great forces which make up our universe. These two universal forces are condensed in each of our belts. Didn't you know? At the moment when the two forces become one, it is possible to seize that power. Then I can turn this whole galaxy into a pile of ashes in an instant. How I've waited for this moment. The world will fall into total darkness.
Not if I can help it. I'll destroy you yet. Let's go!
All right. Probably hit the mines. Alright. Kind of looks like he hit me. There we go. That one's the most annoying. I remember that was like the main obstacle first time I beat this stage on very hard. Yeah, that sounds about right. Kind of funny. Some of the harder ones I have a easier time with. Some of the simpler ones, not so much. Like, I feel like I never really do well on story 1 or 2. Mostly because I don't play them. Yeah. I've kind of... yeah, capsules or whatever. I grinded this one so much that I don't care for it. Chapter 4 is fun. I also feel like it's one of the few cutscenes that kind of holds up so much later. Visually, anyway.
Guys, the party's just starting.
Oh, and so one thing I'm testing too is I'm streaming this at 720p. Because I figured doing a lower resolution for this game is probably going to have it do less compression artifacting as compared to 1080. So if that seems like the case, let me know. Oh, there's way more than I would like. Oh, hey. I didn't even notice the finish. Yeah, so a cool thing I found recently was if you look at Blue Falcon, or I guess any machine, there's sort of like there's a name for it, the lights. You'll notice that as you pass through, there's like a darker area, and if you pay attention to your vehicle, that actually affects it. There's actually a variety of volumes that you're passing through that when you're inside of it sort of dims the lighting. It's the same kind of effect for Sand Ocean, like when you're inside the pyramid, as well as like under parts of the track. That's kind of what's going on there. So it's really interesting because it means there's not a lot of overhead for actually having those, because the stage has a ton of them. Alright, this is much better. Only the other two can catch up. Come on. Cool.
Oh no! After Falcon! Don't lose him! Go! Go after it! What are you doing?
That one's fun. This one's fun. Man, I remember spending like literally 6 hours and not beating this stage. On very hard. Yeah. But this stage is pretty interesting too, from like a development standpoint. Because you'll notice like all of those flames and like smoke. All of those are like an object in the scene. And so the stage has like 1,200 objects, just because most of them are particles. Wow. Lame. Do you have a good handle on momentum throttling? Because I think that's probably the number one thing. Because just saving like, you know, even if it's like 300 milliseconds over the course of the level, really, really helps. Alright, this should be it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, precision comes in a lot of different ways too. I mean, there's a couple things, right? Like, if you can start getting a handle on quick turns a bit, I know that helps a lot. I mean, there's so many parts that go into that. I'd say like part of it too is just like muscle memory with the analog stick, where eventually like you can do just really, really tiny like adjustments. So I mean, for that's really just like playing a lot. Because there's quick turns. If you can get used to like anytime you're drifting, or like if you break grip. If you can get a handle on like being able to sort of spot when you can just tap A, or I guess accelerate, whatever your accelerate button is, to like, because right, like anytime you lose grip and you hit A, again, or accelerate, you'll like reset your forward vector, and so it kind of snaps you out of being in a broken grip state, and that's pretty useful inside the capsule, right? Because anytime you go over like the rounded edges, you tend to lose grip, and so if there's a way that you can, you know, recalibrate essentially to go in the direction that you want to out of that, that helps a lot too. Yeah. And in case I haven't said it yet, hello Flybat. I assume you're kind of lurking. One of the things I really like about this stage in like visually, and I have no idea if it's intentional or not, is if you look at like where the walls are, that kind of blocks most of it. Try and get a better view. Like if you look far ahead on the road, because of like the mip mapping, so like the texture sort of being compressed at a distance because you don't need to render it in full detail. Like here, you'll see that like if you look at the road ahead, it's like, in comparison anyway, it's almost like white along the edges. And as you get closer, that kind of disappears. I haven't looked into if that's like a mint map thing or not. Because it's just a really good way of like indicating to the player like where, you know, the curve is and how close you are to that. Because I always find it funny, there's like some really, really good stuff like that. That's very like pro player. Like pro player. And then there's stuff like this, which is really like the first time you make here, it's a big fuck you. Oof. It'd be really cool too to have like a port town stage that used these assets. I just realized though that because a lot of the story stages kind of have like their own, I guess you could think of it like asset packs. Essentially, they have like unique identifiers that tell them which library they can load data out of for models. Right, so this is like Port Town story, but I just realized that it has properties of lightning, specifically the rain. So I guess even if you had these assets, it wouldn't really be the same as this. I should probably not look at chat when I'm playing this level. There we go. That's better. Not bumping into them at the very end there. Yeah, and that turn at the end too, that's just to kill. Just to kill players. Oh hey, is that the best time? Hardly, it's probably like a few milliseconds there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the contestants, the high-flying medico, Dr. Stewart.
Yeah, curious then, Crodox, how long you've been playing them,
Pico,
based on that.
Japanese warrior,
Yeah, and yeah, there's definitely a ton of really good stuff.
returns, Mighty Gazelle.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're still, like, figuring stuff out, right? So. The visual stuff's the easy stuff. Everything else, that's kind of hard to pick up on.
Well,
Mincemeat time.
but I won't miss this chance to make mincemeat of you. Black Shadow, I'll show you. You'll never beat me.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
Yeah, kind of wish this game came out at a time when games had analytics tied to them, because I would really want to know how many players beat this level, like period, like not even just hard. Because like, I mean, yeah. I don't want to know. Something has to be said for like, especially in an era when just like less games came out in general. You know, usually it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to develop. You know, like who knows how much development time this one stage took, especially when you put into consideration like the modeling of the cinematic. Like, all that time and money put into something that most players won't see, because they won't get through, like, earlier story missions. But then also, even if they did get here, like, they probably won't even see what's after it, just given how hard it is. Should also be boosting. That would probably help. Cool. I think that was Blood Falcon. Yeah, this is probably like the least chat-friendly game. See, there's stuff there, I'll get to it in a moment. Oh, that's the skull? Where the heck is... There he is. Damn. Okay. Okay. he gonna... Oh, that's a missed opportunity. More or less, I think I'm just gonna have to get a really good rail slide out of this. Okay. Yeah, well, I'd actually want to know, like, what the actual sales numbers for the game are. Because I think it got a player's choice, which means 250,000. But I feel like the only time I've ever seen that is like on a European release. So, and you know, like PAL usually gets it at the end. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna pull up a calculator on that. You know, if that is the number, well, I probably could do it in my head, but I'm not gonna do that right now.
Just who are you?
Yeah, let's be nice. Let's just say they sold 350,000 copies. That is 0.014%. Game producer claims 1.5 million. I mean, hey, that is a number. So that's better than nothing. Let's do that again. I mean, that's even worse. That's 0.003%. So I'm gonna do this one again. So here's a fun fact for everyone. Based on everything that I've seen, this is probably the oldest stage in the game, development-wise, like the one that was finished first. Now, that doesn't actually mean, like, this is the first... Well, actually, no, that does mean that. Like, design-wise, this is probably the first stage to be completed. And two reasons. One, you'll notice that the grid that's spinning beneath the stage is blue. And every other, like, mini-map of a stage is green. So this is the only one that's blue, so it indicates at some point, you know, they were using blue and then they decided to use green. And that kind of makes sense given when you look at, like, some of the older versions of the game. Right, like, it was sort of just, like, they used the blue background, so probably to make it pop, right, or something like that. Makes sense to make it green. So there's that. But that was like an indicator. I remember noticing that like 7 years ago. But the other thing that you'll notice in terms of the actual stage data that really indicates that it's the first one is basically that you could make this stage in F-Zero X. And what I mean by that is you'll notice that the track is the simplest of any track in the game. There are no gaps. There are no jumps. There's no pipes, half pipes. There's no, you know, capsule cylinders. There's no morphing of the topology, right? There are no kinks or bends or anything. The stage is just left to right, like a flat surface. And the only thing that changes is the width. Anyway, so because everyone's always asking, like, when is the stage editor going to be done? Yeah, I mean, Love and Lines, like, that's just normal stuff, in the sense that, like, that data, like, in the design phase for the game, right, like, it's pretty easy to say, like, okay, well, these are going to be features we're going to add. Mostly because, you know, the previous game had all those things too. I mean, mines act different, but functionally are, like, the same. Or I guess conceptually are sort of the same. Hello. Anyway, so it makes sense that this is the first stage that was, like, finalized, for that reason, because they didn't need anything fancy. Right? Like, you don't need to, like, add tooling, properly import data, you know, that has these, like, different crazy topology things going on. Because the stage is pretty simple. And because of that, the data for this stage is simple. And for me, that's the important thing. Because basically it means the first custom stage is going to be probably something like this. In the sense that there's not going to be any gaps, there's not going to be any pipes, there's not going to be any bending of the track. So that's just complicated, right? But by studying, and that, okay, so I guess a couple things to point out too. So I just finished, technically, I just finished my work contract on Friday. I teach college level game design, which is kind of ironic, given that I teach in a program that I graduated from after graduating from the program. You know, it's not like I came back 10 years later or something. It's kind of like within a year. But I was going somewhere with that. Yeah, so I finished my work contract on Friday. Technically, I'm not done because I'm grading, but I'm almost done grading. And so my hope is that over the summer, that's what I'm going to be working on, is making the custom stage that basically is simple, but would be like my proof of concept. I already know how like the track data works conceptually. Right, like there's a lot of stuff I've sort of figured out over time. Like what I really miss is like on the Japanese internet somewhere, there's an article talking about the development of this game in some capacity that I can't find anymore. And basically what was interesting about it was a screenshot of Samurai Goro from Story 2, like the cinematics that they made for that. It showed like the rig of Samurai Goro. But what was interesting to me was that was Maya, right? And so that kind of implies, like, games from this era, tools were pretty new and expensive. And so if you were like a big AAA at the time, like you would be able to afford like the, you know, ridiculous fees, you know, because often it'd be like $10,000 for a seat or something like that for some of these pieces of software. So anyway, they were probably, you know, doing some reverse history search type stuff. We know that it's probably Maya 3 or 4, given the year that this game came out, right? Because just because they had a license doesn't mean they have the most up-to-date one. And anyway, all that to say that that's probably what their authoring tool was Maya. And the thing about Maya is you can, you know, that's pretty garbage. The thing with Maya is like you have a bunch of different tools you can use, such as like a spline. And the way that would be stored, wow, this is a huge tangent. And the way that would be stored, like the actual data for that, is like a bunch of animation keyframes that modify the XYZ value of position, rotation, and scale. And so I already know that like that's the data that the tracks are actually stored as. The complication is actually figuring out how Maya sort of interprets. Oh wow, that's really my best, and I bonked at the end. Anyway, given that we know that it's like a bunch of animation keyframes, basically, I mean, it's not that it has to be used for animation, it's that it's a bunch of attributes sort of anchored to things, and then you interpolate between them.
Who are you?
Once that's figured out, we can make an easy stage like Chapter 8. And then once we have something easy like Chapter 8, then we can do something more advanced. Sort of look into where the other stuff is.
Your best creation. So, it was you who set up everything, but why?
To tell you the truth, there are no universal forces. What?
Yeah, I mean, I could make like a 2D F-Zero track, but that's kind of boring. I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, right, like, the first stage that might be made is either going to be a circle or, you know, kind of like a,
You think you can beat me? No way.
or like a ring, like a loop that you just drive forward, it circles back to the start. Yeah. I mean, now that I think about it too, this story, actually, geez. I'm just thinking, a lot of the story missions, now that I think about it, are probably actually really early stages. Like, if you look at this stage, there's also nothing crazy in terms of, like, the geometry or topology. Yeah, there's no, like, bumps or kinks or curves or anything. It's really just no walls. And then let's see, chapter 7 is also pretty simple, right? There's no curves in the geometry, like along the x-axis. You know, it's got, you know, ice and stuff, and that's kind of it. Chapter 6 is also the same, right? There's no lateral stuff going on. Chapter 5 is a capsule, right? That's like one of 3 capsule types in the game. Ooh, almost fell off there. What is chapter 4? Michael Chain, same thing. It's pretty simple. No kinks. What is chapter 3, same thing. The most complicated thing that stage has going on is 90-degree turns. And then chapter 2, same thing. Doesn't really have much things sort of complicated. It's one of the few stages with actual, like, story mode rifting that's sort of serialized as data. But that's not anything huge. Yeah, I mean, for all of the special, that's not true. For a lot of the, I guess you could say, like, surface modifiers, that's not too hard, because, like, the heal pit boost pads, ice, dirt, lava. I know there's more than that, but for those 5 at least, that's just like triangles and quads. So there's nothing really complicated about those other than, like, you have to generate a mesh and then save the mesh in a specific spot of the file. Mines are slightly more complicated in that their data lives in a couple spots. I think it might also live in the area where, like, all those other surfaces are at. But it also lives in other spots, right? Like, so one of the more recent things I was looking at is, like, for story mode 8, the difficulty you choose enables more mines on every difficulty level, right? Like, the, you know, very hard has more mines than normal. And that's, like, the flags that say which mines are for what level is stored in a different spot, along with a bunch of other collision type related things. And so to get mines to work right might actually be more difficult. because if the data exists in one spot and the game expects it in multiple spots, and it's not in multiple spots, then either it's going to crash, or things are going to get weird, or it's not going to work. But the rest of that stuff's pretty easy. Oh yeah, so like jump pads are also just collision. Drivable surfaces are also just collision. So triangles and quads. I'm curious if you see to that comment, or you can shift boost on any stage. Can you get a shift boost on story? Oh yeah, yes you can on story 8 because of the curves. But if we had like an F-Zero X style course with no jumps and with walls, I don't think you could. Chapter 5. I think, well, I mean, in a task, I think people have gotten shift boosts, but yeah. Yeah, I think that is a thing. Not easy to do, but possible. Yeah. All right, let's do. Let's see. I'll do this just so I can talk about it. So for this mission, well, I guess like for fun facts or something. So this is again one of two. So story mode 1 and 2 are the only stages that save mission-specific data in the course file, which is really weird because that means like out of 37 files, and like the official release, only 2 of them have data, which is kind of weird because it means that like probably have put that data in one of those rel files, but anyway. But the thing about it is that, so for story mode 1, the data that it saves is the position of all of the capsules, right? Which should be pretty obvious stuff. What's interesting about it is in F-Zero AX, they don't use that spot to save data. So like in this game, you'll have normal, hard, very hard, all that stuff's like saved in one spot. And then in F-Zero AX, if you were to go look at that same spot, like the data exists for story mode 2 there, but for story mode 1, there's no data. So that part of the file's empty. There's no pointer going there. But what's kind of interesting is there's a different part of the file that's used for different data altogether, and it's used for like some other kinds of triggers. The story mode data for story mode 1 is there, so they were using a different part of the file at the time. And the reason that that's interesting is there's only story mode 1 data. Sorry, there's only normal difficulty data stored there. There's not hard or very hard. And so one thing I'll do at some point is actually compare the data, because it could be that F-Zero AX's version of story 1 actually has the capsules in different points, and it would be possible to then take those positions, patch it into F-Zero GX, and then you'd be able to play story mode 1 and see how that goes. Yeah, AX, like, so that's a good question by that. Like, basically taking an F-Zero AX course data and generating F-Zero GX data. So again, like, the thing that I really, really hate is just when people are like, F-Zero AX and GX are, I don't know, they say different things. Like, F-Zero AX is inside GX, and kind of treat it like it's its own game. Which in its own right it is, but like from a development standpoint, that's just not how that works. And then people saying like AX is built off of GX or GX is built off of AX. I saw a comment like that on YouTube the other day, and it's like, again, that's not how that works. Anyway, I'll spare the details for that for now, but the idea being that like the only thing that separates the files from AX and GX is the fact that F-Zero AX's files are just an earlier format of their scene data. And really all that means is most of the time that F-Zero GX has more kinds of data that it stores as compared to F-Zero AX. And so the consequence of that is when parsing, like when loading in that data into whatever you want to use to view it or edit it, you have to parse it differently, which is to say, like for instance, F-Zero AX has 12 different kinds of collision, I think, right? So if you think of like, oh, what am I doing? Okay, let's. I totally forgot what was supposed to boost. So when parsing in the data, right? So when you're reading in like the files, really all you have to do is be like, hey, is this the F-Zero AX version of the file or the F-Zero GX version of the file? And there's a way to identify that. And it's like, well, if it's F-Zero AX, don't read this part of the file because that part of the data doesn't exist here. And if it's GX, then you say, well, do read in this part of the file because that part of the file does exist here. So loading it in is like the quote-unquote hard part. Really all that means is like you have to be aware that there is a difference and then take that into consideration. And once you have that, then when you go to save it back out, well, again, it's the same thing. It's like, are you saving an AX version of the file or a GX version of the file? If you're saving an AX version of the file, don't save out certain parts of the data, and if you are saving out a GX file, then do save out parts of the data in the format that it's expecting. Oh wow. Get wrecked. I'm probably not going to win this. Wow, that has not happened in forever. Yeah, so to actually import AX data and put it back out into GX, like there is stuff you have to do. It's not horribly complicated. I keep boosting. It's not horribly complicated. It's not a logistical nightmare. But there are things to keep in mind that are more difficult, which would be for instance, the actual track data, that, like, I don't know if that has differences yet or not, and it might. I suspect that there won't be, because that's, like, again, development-wise, like, you're making a racing game, and to test your racing game, you need two things. You need vehicles that you can play, and then you need a track to play on. So, like, that's going to be one of the first things that they're testing, and one of the first things that ideally they're going to, like, finalize so that people can actually work on the levels and their work won't go to waste if they have to change something down the line. Yeah, so that's the main thing. All of the test stages for F-Zero AX are super, super weird. Because technically we would have to reconstruct, like, right, so basically the way this kind of stuff works is you take in a source file, right? Like, so imagine this, you're in Blender, you grab like the spline tool, you draw a spline in 3D, and you set the width of the spline to be certain things, and yada yada. And then, you grab a bunch of objects and you sprinkle them around the stage, and then you tell some kind of tool, take that, and give, and convert all of those pieces of information that you know how to read in one format, in your like Blender format, and output it as a specific format for the game. That's all well and good, and the way that that works for like the actual game at the end makes sense. It's like there's an object and there's references and all this stuff, and you can kind of, you create one object and then you can copy paste it essentially right across the course. But the really, really old versions of the courses don't use that same way of loading everything in. The really old versions basically just have one of each model, and they're not actually put in the scene. The game just knows to load all of those models and set their coordinates to like XYZ of 0, 0, 0, so at the origin point of the scene. And then all of that stuff lines up with the track just right. But the thing about it is, like, newer courses don't do that whatsoever. So we would actually have to bring that course into GX. We would assuming that that functionality is not some kind of like data flag, assuming that it's just a different format and like AX just knows to load it that way, we would actually have to like interpret that data and sort of generate our own version of that same kind of information, and then it would be viewable. But for the most part, those stages, there's a novelty factor for the fact that, it's like in the void and slightly different sometimes. There's not really, usually most of the time those tracks are identical, right? Like, because those tests were the tests to see if the course was good and functional. And once they have that, then, you don't need to do it again. They would take that and then they'd art it up. Alright, so a very roundabout way maybe of explaining, bringing AX data in. So, short story is it's both easy and hard, depends on what we're looking at. Oh, cool. I think that's a new record, and it's got 666 in it.
Here, this is your share. Once again, Black Shadow is running riot in the lightning area. All citizens are
And I think I also misinterpreted that. So making custom stages for F-Zero AX, also not hard. Could take in... Oh, cool, and that's my very hard time. Awesome. Cool, so I just finished all the story stages, so I'm gonna go play some Grand Prix. But yeah, so like, it's not gonna be super hard. Technically, we can use the same data set. The difference is, when exporting on our end, we're gonna have to do some like extra checks, because the name of models for AX and GX differ on occasion, and the index within the archive is different, so you can't just like export one file and then use it in both games. You have to export it per game. Again, not impossible, it's just like some extra work. So I know for like all my reverse engineering stuff, I use F-Zero AX data in my analysis, because it doesn't make sense, like if I'm figuring something out, I want to make sure that it works for F-Zero AX. And oftentimes too, it provides extra data points. So like, if I want to do a statistical analysis of like, what is the possible data that like any part of the stage data can... Oh my god, come on. If I want to do a statistical analysis to figure out, like, what are all the possible values for this thing that I don't know, when I use F-Zero AX, sometimes that gives me some really good clues, because sometimes F-Zero AX uses something more than GX because they decided to use other data afterwards. So So then, like, it's a really useful way of figuring out like what the possible values are. But I know aside from like a couple checks on like loading stuff, I'm not really concerning myself with saving to that format yet. Yeah, like, again, there's some really weird stuff, like, because that's the hardest part, like, when every single file in the game uses some piece of data, that's really, really great, because it means that you can go and have a look and say, like, well, you know, for one, every stage has this thing, which means it's very universal, and it's definitely something you want to figure out. And then it also gives you a lot of different versions for that same piece of data. So it gives you like patterns and stuff, right? You can kind of figure out like what is the nature of that data. But then you get stuff where it's like only a single stage uses it, and that makes it super hard to figure out what it is even for, because it's, right, like it's so niche that like, it's not even like you can go and change it and see what it does on other stages. You don't even know if other stages can use that data, right? And so that's kind of like the case for Sand Ocean Lateral Shift. It's got some data that's only on that stage. And what's interesting is in F-Zero AX, there's more of that same kind of data. So technically there would only be like one major data point, but because we have AX, we have two major data points. And they're two different like permutations of the same thing, and one has 6 and the other has 9. Right, so it's like that's more helpful, but it still doesn't really tell us the whole thing. Right, so like same thing for like, you know, find what this is, outer space, right? So some stuff is difficult, like this is the only outer space stage. So any data that's kind of specific to this stage is harder to figure out because it's the only one. So you have to do like more rigorous testing and stuff like that to really figure out what it is. Because there's a bunch of like volumes, like once you're inside, right? Like once you're inside here, right? Like you can't see the course on the outside. So what it does is it actually disables the meteors, right? Like you might notice that there's not really meteors right now, and then they kind of pop in for a bit. And then there's none, and then they pop up, and then there's none again, right? Like, up until you kind of get to the end, like, all of those things are disabled for rendering. And so, like, the flags for the volumes are hard to figure out because it's, you know, you don't know what the heck it's going to be. And so you have to start, like, moving volumes around with that specific data set on it. And so we figured this stuff out, and it's pretty easy to figure this stuff out because it's visual, right? Like, forgot to mention, there's also volumes here for like disabling the ashes, right? Because you don't need ashes when you're inside like the enclosed volume, right? So yeah, the capsule pipe is going to be a really cool thing to figure out too. Because conceptually, right, like a capsule... Let me take a step back, right? Like, what... To define a pipe, right? Whether that be a half pipe or a full pipe, all you need is a radius, right? For like, from the center point, how far out is that, you know, pipe? And a capsule is really interesting because basically you can think of it as having like two different center points, like one on the left and one on the right. And so, well, actually, I guess the right way to think about it is for a capsule, you have a line. And from the two nubs at the end, there's that radius for the capsule. And then along the line on, say, like, what would be the top and the bottom, you also extend that far out from that radius. So it'll be interesting to figure out, because really all you need is a center point. You can imply what the left and right of the center point is, because all the data has an orientation. And then, so basically what you need is how wide the line is, and then the size of the radius. So it's going to be fun to figure out where that data is. I feel like all of the capsules in this game are horizontal. It'd be really cool to kind of make a map that takes advantage of those pipes, like vertically. Where, like, you know, you can think of, like, you come out of the capsule pipe, but if the capsule pipe is vertical, you know, you might want to, like, jump off the top to have, like, a lot of height and do a dive, or maybe you want to jump out of the bottom, or maybe you want to jump out of the side for some reason, do side attacks, I don't know. Right, but I feel like there's some opportunities to make some cool stuff with that. And it's also interesting to think, like, if you scale it, right? Because, like, I think that, like, only the AX Cup actually scales cylinders like this. Right? Because you kind of get these, like, weird, like, squashed sections of the pipe. And you also see that on Spiral, like, as soon as you jump onto the cylinder. Right, like, this area here is all squashed, because they're scaling the cylinder. It'd be interesting to see what happens if you start scaling scaling pipes and cylinders, or half pipes, like making like an extra wide half pipe or an extra tall half pipe. I mean, it'll also be interesting to figure out if the game actually supports that, if it'll just like ignore the scale. One thing I really want to fix on this stage, this is like so like pointless, but I want to do that. What is it? Yeah, the boost pad, like over here, like this one. Damn, couldn't pause in time. Anyway, that one. I kind of want to just like have someone, either myself or someone, just model like a curved version of the boost pad, just so that like the width of the boost pad isn't just kind of floating in the air. It's so petty. It's so petty of a thing, but I want to do that. Because every time I pass by that, it's just like a really hard reminder that this is a game. And I mean, fair. It's like super unimportant, but you know, let them have curved boost pads. Yeah, basically. That's the thing, right? So like, I know some people have asked, like, you know, how far along is that? And the more I think about it, the more I realize that like that's the wrong question. Because like if we think about like how much do we know about the stage file? I'd say we actually know like 70 or 80% of how all the course data works. A good chunk of that, right, is still like the actual, you know, track part of the track. And, you know, I've actually been avoiding it intentionally. One, because I have work, and if I made significant progress, I would be sleep deprived. Because I'd be working on that, and then I'd, you know, wake up to teach, and then do grades or something, and then at night I'd be working on that. So it just like it didn't make sense to do that. But also, like, as soon as I have something, right? Like I know what's gonna happen, you know, I'm gonna make that like super lame, you know, story 8 style track, and everyone's gonna ask like, oh, well, can we have, you know, can we put, you know, first thing is gonna be like, can we put a heal strip on, right? Like, otherwise you're gonna have a track where you can't heal. And it's like, okay, well then, you know, that's a feature you gotta go and figure out and add. And then, you know, then people are gonna ask, well, can we get boost pads? Or like, can we turn off rails? You know, can I add a gap? Right? Can I add a cylinder? Can I add a half pipe? Can I add a whatever? Right? So like, that's part of the complexity too. Is like, I could just go and like try and interpolate the track data. Like, I've known that it's animation data for like over a year now. But like, even if I did that, or if I made a proof of concept, I would have to spend so much time to like get anything else done that I feel like everyone would kind of just get frustrated. And so it kind of makes sense to like figure out almost all of the other stuff first, because then as soon as there's a proof of concept, then it's like, okay, well then we already know where the other data is. It's just a matter of like going to implement that. And then the feature set becomes more complete more quickly. Interesting. I mean, I disagree with that, if only because... Well, actually, that might be something to look into. Well, like, again, so you can change the visual and have the collision stay the same. And I mean, that's what you would want, just because otherwise you're literally going to be messing up with people's, like, replays and other stuff if you did that. But even if you did change, like, the physical collision, based on how you move along the track, I don't know. Again, it's kind of hard to say. Because if you know how, like, the actual... Like, all of the vehicles are just a fancy cube, right? Like, technically, in the data, you define, like, a height for the vehicle, and you define 4 points, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. The more I think about it, I was thinking, like, how does that extra 10% from a boost plate actually happen? And I was realizing that I think it's if... Right, and someone could probably confirm, right? Like, I think hitting the edge of a boost plate with Magic Seagull is really easy comparatively to, say, like, Mighty Gazelle, to hit that extra 10%. And I think the reason is, I think the way that the game would verify that you hit the edge of the boost plate with your vehicle is, right, if you imagine at the front of your vehicle, there's 2 points, one on the left and one on the right, that defines the width of the front of the vehicle. Those are 2 individual points at the front, and I think, as is common in like a lot of games, when you only have a few data points like that, yeah, I can actually convert this. So each of, I forget where I saw that. I should have taken note. So anyway, got 4 points around the vehicle, 2 at the front. If one of those 2 points hits the boost plate in a frame, like say the first frame you enter, I think if one of those 2 data points at the front, like only one and not the other, if only one and not both touches the boost plate, I think that's how the game knows to give you the extra 10%. It's that the front of the vehicle, only like 1/2, if you will, is known to have entered the boost plate. Because like, you could probably get that extra 10% like going through a boost plate from the side. It's just really hard given like the scale, given the scale of a time step, like how far you actually move in a frame. So if that's the case, then again maybe that pork town modification could be different. I don't know. Let's see. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by, play with boost plate slowly? As in, the vehicle is slow when you're going over it, or do you mean like, opening up Dolphin and doing like warp speed or something? So I don't think so. Again, if the game did that, then I have a feeling, again, like I feel like that would be something that the game would test really early and probably validate, given how important it is to like the gameplay experience. My guess is that when you actually, it's hard to tell. I'm trying to think, because, like... Well, maybe. So, I know that individual boost plates, right, like, there's 3 polygons. 2 of them make up a square, and then there's one for, like, the front of the boost plate, because it has that little kind of, like, arrow shape at the tip. So there's 3 polygons, 3 triangles. I forget if the game stores those as, like, a mesh, like there's an individual reference to that set of polygons. I don't think so. So it might happen. It might have like an identifier, so like you wouldn't be able to hit that same polygon perhaps, but there would be other ones beside it. It's also hard to say, like, given how fast you go, like, do you just pass over... You just pass over the full boost plate sort of within that time frame, so it's not even a problem. It's hard to say. I mean, one thing that would be cool to try out would be like, right, like the game, oh, wow, really? The game only has, it's very, very consistent with the way that it uses boost plates, which is really nice. Like, they always have like a, at least seemingly a fixed width. There might be a couple different widths, but, right, it's always on the ground, it's always sort of a certain size. The only exception, if you will, is Pork Town Lung Pipe with its, like, ginormous, like, I don't know, like 8 different boost plates beside each other or whatever it is. Though, in that case, right, it is just like a bunch of zippers beside each other. It'd be interesting to see if you could just, in the same way that you have like a kill plane, if you could have like a boost plane. Because, I can imagine making courses like Dragon Slopes, where in falling you actually have like these volumes that you might actually want to go like through, like, I don't want to say rings, right, but you could do stuff like that maybe. Yeah. But within the variation of the boost plates, I think it's consistent. Yeah, let's see. That's interesting. Kind of hard to parse that though, because there could be multiple interpretations of that. A visual accompanying that would be nice. Because, again, to me, so boosting twice, in a sense, like, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Like, I think to really get to the root of whatever this is, and I know chemicals have been doing that, like, we would actually have to figure out what the game code is doing. Scroll up for the visual effect. Oh, I see. One, two, one, two. Well, I'm gonna keep doing GP for a moment. The confusion that I have though is based on that. Why exactly going in halfway is what's important. Because again, it looks like in either case, like, it doesn't matter where you hit the boost plate pin, it just kind of depends on a per frame basis how that works. Alright, boost strength. Yeah, I mean, I think something has to be said for that, right? Like, I mean, again, having custom stages would really help with that. Because, like, what happens if you just put, you know, like, over the, you know, again, make like a Death Force or a Death Race style course, but with no jump. It's just a loop. And then all across the center for the whole map, you just keep putting boost plates. Right? You can kind of see, like, how much the boost can exceed. Right? Like, is there like a compounding effect? And if so, how does that work? Oh, I kind of missed that. Yeah. The more I think about it, the more I realize this is never really a game I ever talk while playing. I'm going through the thread in full now, so... I'm curious then, does this kind of effect then also take place if you boost right before entering? Like, are you sort of compounding that value? Okay, well, that's not something I knew about. I mean, I guess it makes sense. I haven't really cared too much for my time attacks in quite a while. Yeah, and so there's a sound effect here. Probably would have been better if this were, I don't know, time attack or something for practice. But it's kind of funny how they have this whole like sound effect visual, which presumably isn't like the easiest thing to actually like, I don't say program, but like, you know, it's a whole thing. And they actually only use it in one spot, so it kind of seems like wasted development time unless they anticipated having that effect in place. Yeah. It's kind of funny too, Sand Ocean has a lot of those like animation triggers, so that, you know, it's like the snake kind of always shows up at the same time, so that the sandworm eats whatever it's eating at the same time. But I think there's like sand shark, sandworm, and like the bird things. They all got names, but interesting. So I'm just having a look at that data. I'm curious then too, so that boost value, is there like different values based on different machines? So like presumably machines with a stronger boost have a better or a higher value for that. Probably pause that. So I guess one thing, in case you didn't know, when the lightning strike happens, for probably just a couple frames, if not a frame, what the game does to make it look, right, so I guess the one way to explain it, right, is if you had like a high dynamic range, you had a very bright light source, it would basically start making everything else look dark, right? Kind of like just the way the human eye would work. Obviously HDR is not a thing from games of this time period. And so what they do instead is every time the lightning strikes, what they do is they actually just crank up how far it would take for the there's like a fog value, right? So things that are far away are dark, and things that are close aren't dark. In this case, right? Aeropolis kind of does the opposite. Things that are far away are kind of like white, right? Because there's kind of like mist or air like in between you and whatever's in the distance. So for this stage, they use like a dark gray value, kind of emulate like the dark rain fog, whatever effect. So when the lightning strikes, what they do is I guess you could say that they turn the distance where fog starts taking effect, or the intensity of the fog, they crank it way up, so that things that are closer to you now have like the fog effect over top. And a way that you could actually check this out, like in an emulator, you go like frame by frame and you wait for the lightning to strike, and if you pause on that frame, and then you unpause, the game won't properly interpolate the fog value anymore. And so that fog effect sort of stays permanent until the next lightning flash. And the only reason I know that is I, at one point, sort of paused on the same frame that it like dimmed the fog. And then when I unpaused, it kind of stayed persistent for a bit. And it was, while it was paused, I could kind of observe it as well. It's like it's a super smart way of doing that. Cool. Well, I guess that means that the boost strength stat actually means something, which is good. Remember, that was always the question, like, you know, are the weights of the machines actually the weights of the machines, and are the those like letter stats they mean? I know there's some stuff where it doesn't necessarily seem to make sense, but so I guess one thing that's cool / weird is on this stage, there's a bunch of volume triggers. I'm trying to figure out what they do, and one of them is just totally off the track. You'd never be able to actually hit it, so it's hard to tell what it's for, given that the game kind of doesn't even want it there. So on the right here, almost exactly where all these buildings are on the right, there's just this giant cube just on the right there, sort of covering those buildings, that if you were to enter it will do something. I'm not sure what the something it is doing, but it's not even over like any part of the track, so you never actually hit it. So clearly it's not that important. But it's really funny. I think for a lot of these volumes, though, it wasn't actually placed by the designer. It would have been placed by like a tool. Because some of them are off in just such a way that it very much looks like a tool did it, and they didn't actually have a way of like debugging or visualizing it in game. Because some things are just like barely off, and you can see like why that might be. So I guess that's kind of cool. You know, in the 20 years since this game was being developed, we finally have tools that are a little bit better. Yeah. one thing I would want to do is, right, like once we start editing stages, we can also start editing cups, which isn't too hard because it's just like an index value. There's some cool opportunities, right? Because we have darn, I forgot the number. We have something like 15 unused venue slots. I'm gonna go pull that up. I should probably. I didn't set up a scene in OBS for this, so I'll do that. But I'm gonna go pull it up really quick. Set stage venue. Yeah, so I mean, I would think most of you are familiar with this, but just in case you're not, right? Like the game has 26 stages and 9 story mode missions, and so each one of those tracks is saved, saved on the disk somewhere, right? Saved on the ROM somewhere. And so each stage has like an index number, right? So the game could say like load the stage number 5, whatever that is, right? And stage 5 is Error Off the List Multiplex, which is kind of a happy coincidence because stage 5 is actually the first stage of the first cup, right? I guess if I want to time attack. Right, so stage 5 is stage 5. But like Sand Ocean is Sand Ocean Surface Light is actually stage 26. Right? Which actually implies that it's a more difficult stage. Because I think I, like many others, would say that Sand Ocean might be more of a 3 or a 4 in terms of difficulty if you're using this like star system. Not that it matters too much. It's not really necessarily the stage that's difficult. It's the AI in relation to the stage. Anyway, so all of those slots have a venue, like, I don't want to say hard-coded because my guess is there's a table somewhere in one of those rel files that indicates them. But without knowing where that step actually is, we have access to like other unused stage slots with specific venues. So I think we have a few Mute City ones, a couple Port Town, Lightning, spare Firefield. What's really interesting is there are 2 spare outer space venues, which implies that they were doing, as can be told from like some of the earlier pre-release stuff, they were testing different stages with different venues. So there's 2 outer space venues available, 1 Cosmo Terminal spare, which when you think about it, Undulation as a stage would actually fit in Cosmo Terminal. Right, like that is a possibility. Some more Lightning, spare Sand Ocean, 2 spare Sand Ocean actually. Right, so we kind of have options for stuff like that. Like if you wanted to add in other stages and not like remove them. Which is cool, but then, but we're also missing stuff like there's no spare Big Blue and there's no spare, Big Blue, no spare Casino Palace, no spare Phantom Road if you really wanted Phantom Road for some reason. There's no spare Com venues, which is interesting. Com is the venue for Casino Palace and Mute City assets, right? So Sonic Oval is the only one that actually uses that. Though technically story mode 1 is also the same stage. Same venue as well. But it's the story mode version of Kong. Because it's like it's got all those like virtual looking pictures and stuff. Right, but if we find the ability to change what venue each index has, we can do a lot of cool stuff. One is we might be able to expand the venues to include, oh my god, we could expand the venues to include all 111 slots, which would give us like a ton of wiggle room. But then it would also let us edit, like, you know, we could say, well, don't use Firefield, let us use Firefield Story, which would be like Deathborn stage. I don't think there's really anything there that's cool, but you know, we could do that. You could do that for Porktown Story, you could do that for Big Blue Story, and you could do that for, there's one other story one. Oh yeah, Sand Ocean Story is Red Canyon. There's not really any assets in there that you care for, but it exists. Oh yeah, so I was talking earlier about like data that seems to have been generated by some tool. So specifically, oh, I missed it. So specifically, like right here, there's a volume that you're supposed to pass through to like trigger some animations just up ahead. For those like little capsule things where like the shields go up. It's supposed to cover like this, what's that, like a hexagon? It's supposed to cover that. But you'll notice that like, so the track that's below me comes right after this, and that volume is actually centered not to the pipe, but to this track that's lower, and so because of that, if you pass on the top side of the pipe, you'll actually avoid the animation trigger. And it's just stuff like that where it's like, yeah, I don't think a human would have actually set that up. You probably would have just set like a point, like how far along the track do you want that thing to show up on? And then like the tool would sort of figure it out from that data. Because there's a couple times where it's like the animation triggers are off because like it looks like it's tagging one part of the track, but it's tagging another. So it's kind of cool on our end because it means that, well, instead of having a tool that automatically does that, we can actually manually set those things up. Right, so there, you could actually find like a, you know, we could actually make like a patch that's like, I don't say a director's cut, because that's kind of insulting. We didn't make the game, so we could have a patch that fixes up tiny little things like that. Yeah, like another interesting thing, you know, we found out of that, like visual, like those visual triggers. So we kind of did a bunch of tests to really figure out what all that stuff is. So it looks like there's 4 different kinds of triggers for leaves, right? It's like when you're passing through parts of the track and there's like leaves blowing by, it's because you're physically inside one of those triggers. Which is cool. Right, so like when you're on like this one half, like that's why there's no leaves here, but there are leaves here. So it's only on the one half. There's like different kinds. I think it's how those visuals look. So like there's, you know how there's like this spare side? there's like leaves that come off when you're on like the outer edge of those. And I think they're a little bit more chaotic. But it's really interesting that there's like so many small variations in a lot of this stuff. It's not necessarily like that it's impressive from like a development standpoint. Like, I mean, it is for the fact that like they took the time to actually do all that stuff. But once the system's there, I don't think it's necessarily that complicated to tweak it. But what's more impressive is that they took the time to like think about it and say that it was worth having those light variations and then actually using them in very specific spots. And the thing that's going to be a pain in the butt is remaking all of the materials for all of the geometry. There's also stuff too, right? Like that's going to be complicated. Like, for instance, what the heck does a cylinder capsule look like on Green Planet? The answer to that is we don't know, right? There isn't one. Right? Like we know what a cylinder or a capsule pipe looks like in Mute City, because Mute City has a cylinder pipe or a capsule pipe. And we know what a capsule pipe looks like on outer space, because we have one. And we know what it could technically look like on Lightning, because we have Story 5, so I think you need to do some modifications. Yeah, but like for other tracks, we don't actually know. Or don't know because it doesn't exist, but also don't have. So we would actually have to kind of like make it. Yeah, so lots of interesting challenges. I hit start there because I wanted to pause. But yeah, there's stuff too. Like when those roads crisscross on the stage, like you have to think about what's going on, right? Like you literally have splines that are intersecting with each other, and so to get the stage data to look appropriate, they actually have to like turn off rails around that section, and then they actually have to store the wall collision in like the separate polygon collision area, right? Because otherwise you would essentially have like vehicles passing through rails, which doesn't work. But then the only way to effectively do that is to table rails for like that whole section and then kind of add in the bits that you want to have. So oh yeah, there's like that unused casino. You know, like those like Triforce and GameCube logos that kind of spin around. There's a casino one that we could totally go and use. That would be kind of cool. I guess one thing I didn't mention earlier was I was mentioning that Story 2 has like data baked into the actual course file, stage file. The data that it's storing specifically is actually the animation, like the triggers for the boulders falling down, and each one basically has an animation that clicks, so it stores all of that animation data in the actual stage file. Which makes sense, like you're storing all of the animation data for each object that's in the scene, so it's not crazy, it's just that it accompanies like a vehicle just through the ground there. Yeah, it's nothing crazy because like that's kind of a thing the game already does, but it doesn't do it for gameplay. I guess what's interesting too is the scale of those boulders is also saved there. So technically, if you want, you can make like smaller or bigger boulders. Yeah, Casino Palace always looks so nice. I don't know. I just really like the red, orange, and blue. So another thing that, just to, I guess, yeah, okay. So if you look at the half pipe, right, again, I was talking earlier about like, to define a pipe or a cylinder, all you really need to say is like, what is the center point, what is its orientation, and what is the radius? Same thing goes for a half pipe, but one thing I kind of didn't realize until I was visualizing like the checkpoint data is the center of a half pipe is actually, if you go to like the center of the half pipe, like at the bottom in the middle, it's above you at the top between both of the edges of the rail. So to actually have, right, like we have this half pipe and it's gonna flatten out. Essentially, it's you can think about it like the upper wings of the half pipe are like they're folding down. And if you think about, well, where's the center of a flat track and where's the center of a half pipe, you'll realize that for the half pipe, basically it's pushing a surface down to kind of give it that shape. And so to have things like to have the half pipe unfold into a flat surface where you're not going up or down, you actually have to modify a lot of the position. It's hard to explain in words. Maybe I'll find an image later, but yeah. One of the things that's kind of crazy is in some of those old screenshots, you know how like all of the track is like super red, right? Because of like just like all the warning lights and stuff. One thing that's kind of crazy is that lighting effect used to actually apply to the vehicles. Like it still applies to like the countdown machine thing, but it used to also apply to the vehicles. And so in like some of the early screenshots, they're like super red, and I'm glad they didn't keep that, because basically, can you imagine how hard it would be to like tell what vehicle is which? Yeah, so like you'll notice that the machine in front of us is like really red. Yeah. Small things. Okay. And one more. Yeah. So one thing that's kind of cool too is these lasers. Basically, at the bottom of each, you just have a tiny little triangle that has that like the lava tagging, if you will. Like it's in the same tool set as lava would be. And one thing that's kind of cool about that is in F-Zero AX, a lot of those pieces of data, like the way that they would actually tag collision, like in Maya, right? Like you still kind of have to think about, like, imagine you're in Blender, and you want one of the meshes that you have in your scene to be lava in this game. Like, you know, you have to kind of indicate to the tool that converts between Maya and this, like, how to know that. It would actually type on the object like class 1, class 2, class 3. And the tool would actually read the name of the objects in the scene, and if it would find that name, it would convert that thing to that kind of object. And the important thing is that you write like class whatever, and that's how the tool will figure it out. But what's like cooler than that is sometimes they would actually name it. So they say like, you know, class 1 road, class 2 heal, class 3 boost, right? Very clear things. For the one that's lava, which sometimes they like, I don't know if they tagged it ever as lava. They tagged it as something that it was clear that that's what that was. For one of them, they had it tagged as INVG. So, for a while I thought that would have stood for like invert gravity. So I was like, oh my god, was there a type of collision that like when you hit would just like reset gravity? So if you were like on a track that was upside down, would it just push you off? And I don't think that's the case. Because again, going back to story 8, which is like the oldest one, in that one they were kind of using, it might have been that name or something else, but I think what it stands for is actually inverted ground. Because you have to remember that the backside of tracks also acts like lava. So I think the idea of having like the backside of a track do damage might have actually come first. That's purely speculation. It might have come first. Or it was just for that specific case, that's what they used it for. Yeah. It's cool stuff. Yeah, so this stage is also, again, going back to that, like, individual data is really hard to figure out. This stage uses a piece of data that only this stage has, and it's right here. If you see where that orange line cuts across to the right, along that edge, they have a bunch of triggers that just exist, and we don't know what it's for. We don't know if it's for, like, you know, if it's when the AI hits it, they know that they need to go up the ramp. We don't know if it's if we go through it, if the game's tracking something. Hard to say. But, yeah. And again, there's this giant like fog volume that once you enter the volume, it changes the fog parameters for Big Blue. That's why when you're like underwater and you look out like the window, things are like fog blue. Because I feel like whenever you're like exiting the tunnel, you notice that like other parts of the level are actually kind of a deep blue, and then it fades away. Also, I don't know if anyone ever looked. So when the starting line is over this like object, it's kind of like this little stadium. If ever you notice during like once you've, oh god, okay, if you ever pay attention, like once you beat the level, that object, that like that ring that you're in when you start, it actually has a part that, in the same way that like in Big Blue Drift Highway, right? Like you kind of go through one of those buildings, like halfway through the lap. There's a different building that has the same kind of cutout built into it, but it's like a different one, and the stage goes right over it. Right, like you can maybe see like on the upper left there's like those little poles like inside the building a bit. There's kind of like these Roman arches, and technically that's made like again, it's one of those things that's just really well done where like the models are modular, and so technically they could have built a stage where part of it you go through a different kind of building that could be suspended in the air. The other one is meant to be on the water. And yeah. Oh god. Yeah. There's so many tiny little things like that that are like, geez. Let's see if I can get the suicide finish. Oh my god, I barely got that. Yeah, man. I feel like I should start a list. Because a lot of the stages have like little like unique quirks in terms of their stage data. Oh yeah, one thing I noticed recently is on that stage there's a fourth platform kind of off the stage, like in the direction that Samurai Goro was facing, or I guess any of the characters that they were facing. There's a fourth platform, and I think that's used for multiplayer. But multiplayer, I don't think you ever get to see 4 platforms at once. So it might actually be that it puts the player in fourth on that one, but that one is out of view. I guess you could actually check with Freakian. But yeah. Alright. Couple tickets. And I wish there were more uses for tickets. Alright, well, I think that'll be it for me for today. I'm surprised people were here, so thanks for joining. Yeah. Again, my intention is, now that I have some spare time, I'll probably I tested I tested streaming like development stuff, and that's fine. But I think it's probably not what most people are actually interested in. But I'm probably gonna try and do that on a regular schedule. Okay, well, I guess the question I would have then is, how exactly do you confirm double boost? Like, do you slowly... Like, I don't know, because for me it's, you know, you hit the edge and you kind of hear it. Okay, is it more or less like you get the visual effect for the sound twice? I would presume that, you know, that's kind of a... We're saying... Yeah, let's use a... I guess I'll use what I must do. I see. Yeah, that makes more sense. That's quite strange, actually. So it looks like there's at least a velocity threshold. That's kind of interesting, because over the other one I got them like way more. Yeah. Let's see, because on this one... Huh. I'm curious, because there's at least 4 points that chat. Right? Because you have at least four points of contact against the track. So... I forget. Because I remember noticing something with... I think it was gravel. Maybe I should use Falcon, but... Yeah, I forget. There's also like a threshold for jump plates. Oh yeah, so yeah. Alright, so I think that's what my observation was. So like the effect, aside from it looks like it's actually moving me left and right. Oh, I guess it doesn't do anything else. I forget. There was one thing where it's like interesting. That looks like okay. Huh. Yeah, I know there's that like if you enter it slow enough, there's weird things going on, but yeah, and mines are weird. A lot of this stuff is weird, but that's okay. But yeah, like over here, there's a volume doing something. Well, okay. That's that. Well, weird game with weird things, but it's good. Alrighty then. Well, thanks again, if you were here watching and saying stuff. I appreciate it. Yeah, again, my goal is probably in the future to have some, at least for, hopefully, for the summer, have kind of a consistent schedule where, yeah, my guess is I'm probably not going to live stream development so much, mostly because, you know, there's a certain amount of knowledge needed. Not to say that I won't do it, right? But that it's probably not going to be the main thing. It's probably going to make more sense if, like, weekly I actually just stream, like, this is what I did in the last week, and what problems maybe I fixed, or what weird things I found, or something like that. But yeah, and then every so often I might just do this, because this was kind of the thing I normally do, which is just, like, play Grand Prix for like an hour or two, you know, for fun. Yeah. Alrighty, thanks again. I'll figure out raids at some point, but in the meantime, hopefully there's just somebody else playing F-Zero or something. Alright, so don't know what time zone you're in, but if you're in a time zone like me where it's like 10:30, have a good night. Alright, take care everyone.